Welcome back to War Thunder, and welcome to the tank review on the Vickers MBT, which is a British rank 5 battle rating 7.0 medium/main battle tank. I will let you know everything that is important about this tank, how to make it work, how to fight it, compare it to its main opponents on the battlefield, and show you its strengths and weaknesses. This vehicle in a nutshell is outstanding, and it plays very similar at 7.0 how you would play a Leopard at 8.0, of course, except with the HES shell or without the heat shell. And typical for all L7 gun variants, the APDS is not the killer shell, it's the HES shell. And actually it's the Germans with their King Tigers that in a head-on engagement give you the biggest problems. But what makes this tank outstanding is truly how this gun performs. In many ways and in many stats, it changes or is different to a lot of its similar gun variants like the L7A3. In both the reload speed, which is completely insane and off the scale, and actually increases further power creep within War Thunder, especially at lower tier 5. But also the complete lack of armor lets this tank play in a fashion that is again very similar to the Leopard. So without further ado, let's begin with the tank review, and let's start of course with the armor. And the armor on this tank is not very good for this tier. The lower plate actually is 80mm thick. The effective thickness is around about 100-105mm respectively. The angle has to be in your favor to make the effective thickness stronger. But a lot of AAAs now begin to challenge you with the lower plate with their top belts. The upper plate is just 60mm thick, and that now fully comes in with a lot of the overmatch mechanics, or shall I begin to mention the armor interaction rules, where the caliber really matters. And even the constructional armor slope of 56 degrees just doesn't stop anything. Even long 88s from the Germans or even Panthers will slice through this armor like there is no tomorrow, especially on the hull. The sight, very weak, just 30mm. This is AAA food. Yes, there are some side skirts, yes, there are some boxes for tools, but overall 30mm is nothing worth mentioning about. The rear, also very weak, 19mm and also 20mm. The engine deck has two parts, 25mm, which is not terribly bad, but then we have those fences here on top of the engines, probably for cooling, that are just 5mm thick. And then we come to the turret. So it is here just 80mm thick on the gun mantle, 100mm directly around the gun, 40mm here on those very slow parts, and 80mm here. And we also see a lot of overlap directly around the gun. But it's even not enough to shield you again from normal APHE shells from the Germans or the Russians. And it's also mostly flat. Then also even the rooftop is 25mm. Again, we have to talk here about overmatch or semi-overmatch mechanics. Then the side of the turret together with the turret ring is just 40mm thick. Again, we have some steel boxes. The frontier section is just 60mm thick. This is not a main battle tank as the short MBT would suggest. So it lacks the armor that it needs. But you know, how does it look inside? Well, we have a very big prominent ammo rack here, which is like 25 rounds. And this is your typical modern tank style ammo rack next to the driver, which we have on the left side, so British lineup, together with the gunner and the commander on the left side and the loader on the right hand side. Then we also see the cannon breech, which absorbs a surprising amount of shells. or damage, should I say. So when somebody shoots at you with APDS, you very often lose one, maybe just two crew members when they hit the turret. I never thought, I guess I never died to a APDS penetration from the front, except from the side when they hit all three crew members. Then the rest of the ammunition is kind of stored like some of the mid-tier British cruiser tanks. So it's very difficult actually to miss ammunition if you take the full ammunition loadout, which I actually would recommend. Then we also have, of course, the engine with the transmission and the fuel tanks in the back of the vehicle. Overall, the vehicle has a bit of size, which lets the crew sometimes survive strange shots, but in most of the cases you die anyway to an APHE explosion, and when an APHE round explodes here, it's not the ammunition that detonates, it's always the crew that dies. But this might be just how the hit camera works, that it prioritizes crew damage first showing before module damage. Overall, this tank doesn't rely on its armor or its survivability, which is a hard to catch phrase, so it's not a mouse. Now, I just stated that some aspects of this tank are rather unique, and so is its placement within the British tech tree, because it's in the heavy tank line and it comes after the Carnarvon and before the Conqueror, so it kind of closes the BR gap. But it really doesn't fit in there. Now, I probably cannot compare this tank to every opponent or tank of its own nation that there is. It would just take too long, so the selection here is for numerous reasons. The horsepowers are not that good, 535, but the weight is also not that heavy with 38.1 tons. The horsepower to ton ratio ends up at 14.0 quid, and that is just a bit better than the Carnarvon, so it's not outstanding. In fact, it's a little bit below average. On a medium tank, you like to see 15 horsepower plus. The top speed, on the other hand, is much better than its predecessor, the Carnarvon, with 48 kilometers an hour. That is 14 kilometers an hour faster, and you also have the possibility to reach it, so it's not a theoretical stat like on the Leopard, for example. But again, it's not outstandingly good. It's kind of in the middle. The reverse speed of minus 11 kilometers an hour is, on par with the Carnarvon, which is in the heavy line the first one with a decent reverse speed. So you don't lose on that. It also features neutral steering. Overall, the mobility, the maneuverability, it's decent, but it is not a Panther 2 or an Object Nano 6 in this respect. But you kind of expect it. So it has the shape and the appearance of a main battle tank, but lacks the armor. The survivability is not very good. It's low profile, and the mobility is overall average from a standpoint of medium tank. But the horsepower to ton ratio doesn't tell you everything. So the ground resistance stats seem to be rather decent for this tank. It's not outstandingly good, but you also will go across country, which is kind of a typical flavor for the British tanks. The next comparison is rather interesting when it comes to the firepower, the gun and the gun handling. First of all, we have here the highest caliber together with the M60A1 AOS in this comparison, which is a 105mm gun. And it is the L7A1, the very same gun that is featured on the Centurion Mark 10. Overall, you have 44 rounds of ammunition, which is not too good, to be honest, especially when we compare it to the M60, the Carnarvon, and even the Panther. The reload, on the other hand, is completely outstanding. 5.0 seconds for an ace crew. And to just put that in perspective, I want to compare it with the M60A1 AOS, which has the M68 gun, which is basically a variant of the L7A3 gun, which by itself is a improved version of the L7A1. And where the 3.3 seconds time increase in reload speed comes from, which is like 66% more reload, I can't explain. And it becomes even more ridiculous when we compare it to smaller guns such as the 20 pounder, which is an 83.4 second millimeter gun, which has a 6.3 second reload for an ace crew, and even the Object Nano 6 with its 6.0 for its 85mm gun has a 20% longer reload. Again, to just put that into perspective, the Vickers stock, without any crew abilities whatsoever, reload speed is 6.5 seconds. That is just 0.2 seconds longer than an ace crew on the Carnarvon with the rapid firing 20 pounder. That's insane. But to even put that more into detail, the Centurion Mark 10's ace crew reload is 6.7. The Leopard 1 A1A1 with its ace crew 7.1, so it's 2.1 second longer than higher tier main battle tanks at 8.0. And we'll later have a look at the ammunition. You're not that far off, so the reload is insane. To give you another example, the typical crew replacement speed is around about 10 seconds. So with the first shot fired, you can pump 2 more shells into an enemy tank before it's likely that he will be able to get the crew back into position, for example the gunner, and by that time you should have killed the enemy tank. So the reload is completely off the scale, it's completely insane, and I have no explanation why that is. In many other games you just have an improved version with better kind of handling stats and, for example, reload stats at higher tiers. But in this game it's kind of the other way around, at least when it comes to the reload speed, because the turret rotation speed of 18.0 degrees per second is not that high. It's the very same as the Carnarvon, but a lot of other medium tanks, except the Panther II, have around about 22-24 degrees per second. The gun depression is another drawback. Unlike many other British tanks or tanks being equipped with the L7 gun or its variants, it does just have -7. That is not too good, and very often you think you can engage the enemy, but then you have to expose much more of your tank to get the gun down, and because of the lack of armor, you then get killed. Most of the time with one-shot gun. 20 degrees of gun elevation is rather nice. The elevation speed is 4.0 degrees per second, unlike other tanks that have 4.5 like the Carnarvon or the Object Nano 6. Both mentioned tanks respectively have a gun stabilizer, but so does the Vickers MBT. In combination with that fast reload, this tank feels much more like you're playing arcade with cheats in realistic battles than you are actually driving a proper tank. It's that ridiculous. Let's talk about the first ammunition type, and we have here the shot L28A1, which is an APDS round. It's also your stock round. By the way, there is no round to research, except for the smoke launchers, but that are not fired from the gun. So this tank is ammunition wise pretty much stock free. You have a 303mm penetration value with 1478 meters per second. That means this gun is really great at engaging enemies at long distance, and when you have to lead them because, for example, they're moving. Now, I think this is a rather unreliable round. I actually prefer personally the 20 pounder, but again, you then can increase your battle rating or what you face by a normal matchmaker to 8.0, like T10Ms, mouse, and so on. And the APDS is also not very great when it comes to damage dealing. So this is a round that you still should take with you when you, for example, shoot at thick flat armor, and also when you have to shoot through fences, building, trees, bushes, obstacles, and things that the next shell can't penetrate, like add-on armor slash spaced armor. This shell will serve you in this respect quite well, but it's not my first choice. My first shell choice would be the second stock shell, which is the shell L35, which is an hash shell. Again, like with the first round, the APDS round, this is actually pretty well known by War Thunder players of higher tiers. It's pretty much the hash shell that you have on any L7 gun or its variants throughout all nations except the Russians. It is a 15 kilogram heavy warhead with a muzzle velocity of 730 meters per second, so it's much more difficult to properly aim and lead, especially at long distances. You cannot really fire through bushes or wooden obstacles. You cannot fire through buildings, although when they are destructible, they will immediately collapse. The TNT equivalent of 4.31 kilograms immediately should initiate hull break on any vehicle when it hits it, when the vehicle actually features hull break, but it really isn't that reliable. So, sometimes, this shell just doesn't do the job, but then you most of the time can switch to the APDS, especially with the quick reload. So always take like a 2-to-1 ratio between hash and APDS with you. 127 millimeters of penetration kind of is a very important threshold, because you still can penetrate the hull of frontally of any Russian tank, which is very nice because you face them very often. But the most dangerous tanks to you are actually the King Tigers. Not just because they can easily penetrate your armor and one-shot you most of the time with the high explosive filling, but they also kind of give you the need to switch to ammunition. If not for the King Tigers, you would constantly fire nothing but the hash shell, which I most of the time do. When you face King Tigers, you then can try to immobilize them by shooting their lower plate, which then will destroy the transmission, and then you can try to flank them, try to disable their gun with the APDS round, and then you can penetrate their turret front easy mode with the APDS. And for flanking shots, again, hash does the job most of the time. If not one-shotting enemies, it does tremendous amounts of damage throughout the entirety of the tank. Just crew members at the very other side of the tank have a chance to survive with the respective crew skills. The next shell type is a bit of a surprise, because it's actually the hash range finding gun that is very similar to the one of the chieftains. So I said that the hash round is a little bit difficult to aim, but if you fire a salvo of your machine gun, the tracers of the heavy machine gun actually indicate you where you should aim with your hash round. And that is a pretty significant advantage. The gun is coaxial, right next to the coaxial 7.62mm M1919A4, and where even when the tracer runs out, the impacts are still little explosions of the 12.7mm L21A1 IAI rounds, and there you should aim, and then you most of the time hit exactly there, because the trajectory of those rounds is similar to the hash rounds. So just a little side note right there. The last stat card for this tank review is actually a ammunition selection overview comparison to its major opponents, and we can see that this tank just has 2 shell types, as I just said, in comparison to other tanks that have at least 3 shell types. The Russian Object 906 has APHE, HE, and Heat FS. However, the HE is useless, like on the Panther 2 and the Type 61. But all the other mentioned kind of tanks have also access to APHE, which is still a great damage dealer and lets you allowed to shoot at other places and probably kill tanks that you can't deal with in the very same way. But again, I have to say that the rate of fire and the special ammunition selection serves you well in every scenario if you know how to use and select the shells properly. So let's quickly recap all that there is to know about this tank. This tank is at battle rating 7.0. It has APDS and hash from the very beginning together with a stabilizer, so that means also that the suspension upgrade is in fact important. It also sacrifices a lot of armor, doesn't gain too much mobility for it, but it has insane reload for it. I have really no words what to properly think about this tank. In one battle it seems completely overpowered, lets the enemy no chance, especially if they come at you one by one. But in other matches you just get simply killed by AAA, such as even Coelians, even from the front, if they know where to aim. At the end of the day, this is a very, very strong tank for aggressive players when it comes to fighting the enemy, but it is not very good for tankers that like to make a stand. This is not what this tank is for. In this role, the Centurion Mark 10 is simply better. It can move around on the battlefield, it can surprise the enemy with practically a hail of shells. 2 or 3 tanks in conjunction can be completely devastating if they put the enemy in a crossfire. So yeah, I think that's enough with the theory. Let's put it into practice. And this is a nice match that I had. And the sole reason why I didn't get more kills in this game, I guess, was down to the fact that the rest of my team also did pretty well. However, at the end of the match there were no enemies left to kill, so that was a drawback. So here you can see me rushing for the C cap. However, I don't like the usual routes directly to the left because they are heavily camped by ATGMs, but also long-range snipers. So a bit of the side route, more or less through the middle between A and C, seems to be a bit safer, at least for me. And you can see the speed overall. Now I'm exceeding the top speed of many other British tanks, including the Centurion Mark 10, Mark 3, Carnarvon, and yeah, even the Chieftain. So you always are driving around other British tanks top speed, but you can't make big gaps in short runs. In the long run, yes, you will be faster. Now you can see here me misaiming on the beginning. That was a side shot, and also even the second shot doesn't properly kill the IS-6, but then shooting for the angled front plate gives me the kill. Again, it were the crew members at the other side of the tank that kind of were a little bit protected, what it seems like, by the pure distance, and that lets them survive the first penetration. However, the turret ring then got jammed, and many other tanks also suffered great internal damage to the gun breach, the turret ring, even the elevation mechanism, and then either the gunner and or the driver are down if you don't kill the tank outright, if you aim properly for the middle of the crew compartment. It is, yeah, not a complete replacement for APHE. However, against Russians, this works so much better than even the Yak Tiger's gun frontally. For side shots, you always have to be careful when it comes down to not hitting the tracks, spaced armor, and such things. If you are very used to the APDS round, yes, sure, go for it. But I have learned that hash is in what seems like 85 to 90% the best choice. So you can see me here using it quite excessively. I initiate hull break on the ZSU-37, which is always nice, and lets them silence pretty fast with one shot. Again, this is important. This tank potentially could penetrate me and yeah, do damage to me, and also could give my position away. And now I'm sneaking actually behind enemy lines. Now you saw me here crawling up this hill in an acceptable rate. Then I now try to go behind enemy lines. So this is not directly flanking due to the map design, but I'm actually moving myself between the front line currently, but also the spawn point. So it's a dangerous gamble. You have to be constantly aware of your surrounding, keep the head and the turret moving, and just go into positions where you can be sure that you can be engaged only by from one direction at a time. And then again, this is an IS-6. I hit the back of the turret flash, gun breach is down, and now I actually splash down because I again hit the side of the turret, but then I hit the back again, and this time the shrapnels fly through, killing the remaining two enemies or crew members of this tank. I looked behind me, there was an enemy looking outside, out of the position or the corner right now, and I think to myself, well, let's just move around. Again, the stabilizer here helps a great deal in, you know, taking my chances. You very often surprise enemies because very often they think, you just have fired, you're moving, no way you are able to engage. This T-44-100 had no stabilizer, he could have shot me, and this is the great reload for also taking out the T-34-57. He could have shot me if I would not have had that great reload. So again, this just was the scene describing all the strengths of this tank. Again, against Germans, with some of them having side skirts or too thick armor for the hash, you should, you know, always keep in mind to use the APDS run. But then again, you have to aim properly for the gunner. Again, the post-penetration damage is not that radial as, for example, on the hash run. But then again, you know, you're taking your chances. But look at this. Beautiful. He didn't have a chance. I saw him coming. I did not have had to stop. And this, at this very precise moment, is like half of the match. And I'm up to 7 kills. Now from this moment on, there were actually no further engagements, so I make a few cuts. Here I moved around the entirety of the map, tried to go to our cap circles, but our team was well placed to cover all cap circles. And that's ultimately the end of the game after a further 5 to 6 minutes of just driving around without any further engagement. And yeah, it just showed how brutal this tank can perform in the right hands and with the right playstyle. Looking at the post-battle results, we can see a lot of awards, 46,000 silver lines for my income and 5,000 vehicle research points and 4,000 modification research points. This also was a test drive that Gaijin gifted to me after I requested it, so thank you Gaijin for providing me this tank. I had a lot of fun playing it, and I hope I gave you a good impression what you can expect from this tank. As usual, let me know in the comment section your thoughts about this tank. Does it have equivalent in every other nation? Is it fair? Is it balanced? Or is it overpowered? Is it too weak? What do you think about the reloads? And as always, give this video a like if you did, subscribe if you want to see more, and we'll see each other on the battlefields of War Thunder.